Hey, good morning, everyone. Beautiful but windy day here in Kingman, Arizona. Starting with a little bit of music. So, Woody and the boys, the road crew. Then we'll introduce you to Todd.
Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
It's a little bit of a theme song from our good friends Joe and Woody and the boys of the road crew. If you need a theme song for your road trip or some road trip inspiring music, I highly recommend the Road Crew. And since we're talking about neon today, take a listen to their song Under the Neon by Joe and Woody and the boys. Hey, Todd, good morning.
Good morning, Jim.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you out there in Arizona?
We're going to blow away today. It's yeah, this is the only place I know of. They say when you turn on the radio in the morning, they say it's breezy and it's 40-mile-an-hour winds. So,
If they say it's windy, don't go outside.
yeah, when you see a German Shepherd at the end of its leash flying like a kite, that's not good. Hey, thank you for getting up bright and early and doing this morning, sir.
It's my pleasure. Always happy to talk to people about neon.
Oh, neon, there's something truly, truly magical about neon. There's just no other way to put it. It's just, there's something magical about it.
Absolutely. I usually save this for the end of our talk, but people come into the neon shop and they say, I've always loved neon. I just don't know why. And I say, you want me to tell you why? And they go, okay, tell me why. And so I always tell them, neon is the fifth most abundant element in the universe. It's not terrestrial. It does not exist on the earth. It comes from the cosmos into the atmosphere, and we breathe it in and out every day. And when you look at the Space Hubble telescope photographs of star nebulae, what you see is neon. You see neon lights. And so we know from Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson that we ourselves are made out of stardust. So when we see a neon sign or we hold a neon tube in our hand, we see our cosmic selves illuminated. Nothing in the world except neon does that. And that's why people love neon. They're seeing their cosmic stuff illuminated. And when I tell people that, they go, "Oh, I guess that's why I love it."
Well, pardon the pun, but that adds a real cosmic dimension to this neon discussion. Uh, yeah, I'll tell you when you and I first talked and met, and then I did some reading articles in Denver, and I shared a link here with your project, things of that nature. You've got such an infectious enthusiasm for neon, and what you are doing with your team in Denver. I think other communities need to be aware of this because they need to plagiarize it. They need to emulate this in their own community, either restoring neon or recreating historic neon signs or creating new neon signs. But it adds such a dimension to historic districts.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, there are communities that we are plagiarizing. So there's some great places. And so on Route 66, Tulsa,
Oh
just
yeah.
phenomenal. And so they've been after it for quite a while. So they're just doing a phenomenal job in terms of, what the city invests in their signs, how they preserve their sign codes, and so I actually called, Tulsa to find out stuff from them, and then there's a guy up in Pocatello, Idaho. Randy Dixon is his name, and Pocatello is doing a tremendous job with their neon signs as well. So I appreciate you saying people should plagiarize us, but also, I plagiarize other people. Um, but one of the great things that's happened, I think, since the last time we talked, Jim, was that I do state and national historic registry nominations. And so in Denver, I got the first neon piece. And so it's a neon art piece, but it's 52 by 52 feet. It's huge. And so it's the first piece of neon that's attached to a building where the neon itself is the historic object. And the building is not. The building is just contributing to the historic nature of the neon, but it itself is not. And so the neon is what is historic. And this is the first time that's happened, which is a huge, huge kind of breakthrough for us here in Denver.
Yeah. Oh my. We have a little bit of neon news here as well. That might right here in Kingman, Arizona. We have the Hotel Beale has been closed for decades, and on the roof is a towering. What do they call the signs that's on a framework?
Yeah, so they call them different things. They call them scaffold signs or rooftops. They have different names for us, but probably a scaffold sign.
Yeah, that's it. That has been dormant for decades. Well, on November 2nd, during the fun run, Kingman Main Street is flipping the switch. That neon is coming back to life.
That is awesome. Can you put a link to that sign or
Yes, I just got the press release just this morning before the program started, and I will have that up and shared. But the building, the hotel, is still a long way from being anything close to usable. But this is a major, major milestone.
and does the sign advertise the hotel or is it a
Yeah,
different?
it says Hotel Beale, air cooled.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, yeah, this is gonna be great. How did
Well, just
your
before we leave that, Jim, if we can,
yes?
one of the amazing things about those scaffold signs is that neon in the early part of its introduction to America, a lot of what it was used for was aero airplanes. So the aerospace industry, as we call it now, but the aeronautics industry as it was then. And so they used neon rooftop signs as aviation beacons. And so a lot of those early signs were on top of buildings and they were huge. Like Richfield Oil would make these incredible, 4 to 8 story scaffold signs so that pilots could navigate by these signs that were on top of the buildings. And I'm not sure that that's what's happening with the hotel there, but a lot of those early large rooftop signs were used for that reason.
Well, we've already jumped the tracks on this conversation, but that's
Sorry.
it. No, but that's interesting that you say that because we haven't been able to pin down exactly when that sign was put on the roof, but it was sometime in the early 1930s, and it just so happens TAT Airlines, Transcontinental Air Transport, Charles Lindbergh,
Yeah.
opened a Port Kingman, a terminal here in Kingman in 28 and 29. And the terminal building is still here in Kingman. And Charles Lindbergh was a guest at the hotel during construction. And Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart were both guests at the hotel during the ribbon cutting.
Yeah. No, Charles Lindbergh came to Denver, I think in 27, and they asked him what's going to change the course of uh, air travel. What's going to be the things that help it? And he said there's 3 things that are going to change it: the ability of pilots to stay awake. And if you've seen Jimmy Stewart in The Spirit of St. Louis, the whole movie is about him trying to stay awake. But he said pilots staying awake, radio, and neon. Those were the 3 things that he said were going to change aeronautics. And in exactly that way, a lot of the early airfields had these incredible neon beacons.
You've had a very twisted and colorful road that led you to this neon. I wouldn't say obsession, but yeah, but you've had a very twisted journey to your
Yeah,
passion for neon.
yeah. And most things aren't linear. I expect it's the same with your. No road trip you go on, Jim, is a straight line.
Oh no, not at all. The bridge is out. You turn left at the how and next thing you know, you're out in some farm field, and
And
yeah,
it's the
that's
best trip you ever had.
exactly yeah.
Yeah.
So
No,
how did you get started with neon?
yeah. So um, back in the, this was being the mid 80s. And so I was young at that point. I was in my early 20s. And my wife was a personal assistant to an author. And this woman was, it was a kind of woman's issues author. And so she had written this fairly popular book. And so she was hosting these women's get togethers, these women's retreats. And so my wife went on one of these women's retreats with the author who she was the personal assistant to. And when she came back, what happens at a women's retreat stays at a women's retreat, right? So she came back and she said, "Hey, I was just at this women's retreat." Uh-oh, I'm not sure what that was, but
Go ahead. We're
she
doing
said,
fine.
okay, she said, "I was at this women's retreat and this woman said, my son's going to neon school." And I was like, "I'm going to neon school." And I'd never thought of it in my life, like never thought one thing about it. And so we moved to Minneapolis where there was a school, and I went to this vocational school to learn the trade. And after 6 weeks of this school, I couldn't do anything. People were like, "Oh, you'll get a job when you get out." And, it takes a long time to learn how to bend glass. And so I got out and then I kind of kicked around trying to find a job. And I finally landed a job in a neon union shop. And so I landed this job in this big union shop. And then I was the only two bender in there. And so, but for about 3.5, 4 years, I just made a ton of glass, just lots. And so this shop did a lot of shopping malls. And so one of my claim to fame is that I did the neon for the Mall of America, right? These gigantic, like 10-foot letters, and so that's where I really learned was at that shop where I just bent a ton of glass. And I come back to Denver. And when I came back to Denver, I worked at a small little shop. It was a father and son. So Maury and his son Glenn, who are at Maury's Neon. And Maury learned to bend glass in 46, and maybe later we'll come back to, why that was. But he learned to bend glass in 46, and then his son joined him in 85, and then I joined them in 93. And so it was just the three of us in this small shop. And then I worked there for about 7 years. And so at that point, I'd been in the neon for about 13 years, bending glass. And, I just got to the place where I was like, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a teacher. I'm going to try to be a teacher. And so I actually went back and became an elementary school teacher. So I taught elementary school for 15 years. And after I finished that, I was like, I'm going to get a degree in chemistry just because I love chemistry. And as it turns out, chemistry is very important in neon. And so I went back, got a chemistry degree. And then when I came out, the Maury's Neon called me and said, "Hey, we're starting to do this work on restoring signs." And they knew that I loved it because when I worked at Maury's Neon, Maury had been the president of a local two benders union, which was pretty rare. There were two benders unions like in New York and Chicago, some of the bigger cities, and kind of the East Coast where you have unions. But Colorado's not a union state, and there's not a lot of neon union, two benders unions. But I was like, that's incredible. And so he had all these old records from the union back in the 50s and 60s. And so I was like, I'm going to collect a sign from each of the union shops. And so back in the 90s, I started collecting these signs and restoring them. And we had like a little tiny museum. There was about 10, 12 signs in there that I had collected from all the different guys that had bent glass. And then, when it got hard for them to survive as a business, they sold off all of them but the ones that Maury had made. And so when they came around again in 2020 is when it came around, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to start restoring signs again. We're wondering if you'll come back and work on the restoration of signs." And so I said, "Sure." And so I came back and started restoring signs for them in 2020. And then I had signs in Denver there. I was like, these are signs that should be preserved. And so I started approaching owners, preservation community, and I just wasn't getting any traction. And I was like, why won't people pay attention to me, right? And so then I had this kind of, my wife, who's incredible, said, "Hey, you can do this program, and there's a historic preservation master's degree at the University of Colorado in Denver." And so then I started in the master's program in historic preservation. And that's when things really took off, And so when you say it's this long, twisty road, so it took all these twists and turns. But as soon as I joined that program, I joined the master's program on my 60th birthday. So at the orientation, there's all these 20 and something and 30 somethings and me. And I was like, yeah, as today is my 60th birthday, and I'm giving myself a master's degree for my birthday. And then I said, first day of this, I said, and I'm here because me and a bunch of other people are going to save the neon signs of Colorado. And then for the next 2 years, I was in this program, mostly night classes because I was still working in the neon shop. There were some Saturday classes, but it was mostly nights and weekends that I was in these classes. Every class I was in, I was like, I'm here to save the neon signs. I'm here to save the neon signs. And it just became that everybody knew me as the guy that was going to save the neon signs. And so I went to conferences, I went to all kinds of places, and I just kind of became the neon preservationist here in Colorado. And so that's how I got to this place where now I'm talking to you, Jim, because I was at a conference and somebody said, you got to meet Jim.
Well, yeah, Mary Frances is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, there's twofold. I've been having a lot of conversations about remaining relevant as we age. And that
Uh-huh.
means adapting, being willing to change, taking your life skills, applying them to different things. Just because we're getting old, we're not dead. There's
Hmm.
still things we can do, and how we can change communities. And what you're a prime example of this with your passion for neon and the twisted road that led you here. But
Yeah.
the neon, there's such an awakening. And you mentioned Tulsa. I mean,
Yeah.
those folks, when it comes to using neon for, pardon the pun again, shining the light on blighted neighborhoods
Yeah.
and helping revitalize. These folks are selling everything on the hog, including the squeal.
Yeah.
They're going gangbusters. They've got vision. Uh, this is really an exciting project. Now, you still teach. You're not just focused on Denver. That's your primary, but you're looking to see neon come back to life all throughout the state.
Yeah, and as it turns out, not just the state. Like I gave mention of other people that are working, and there's a lot more. There's people in Tucson. So Jude Cook and Monica, his wife, they have the Ignite Sign Museum down there in Tucson, and so they're doing a great work in Tucson. And the city of Tucson has started to create neon districts as well, where you have to, like, if you bring a business into that area, the signage that you use is neon. Nashville's doing the same thing, and so it's happening all over, And so now I'm like, okay, so Colorado's not big enough for what a lot of us are up to. I was recently presenting at a conference in Rhode Island, and this is the Association of Preservation Technology, and so it's kind of this twofold aspect to it. It's this international group of people, and there's like the really academic people, and so they study like the materialism of stuff, what's in the blue paint that was used in, the Giliguchi communities down in South Carolina or whatever, right? There's that part of it, and then there's like the legal part of it, and there's people that are, in Washington D.C. advocating for preservation, and then there's the craftspeople who show up and say this is how we do it, and just
Mhm.
incredible. I met a stone cutter from Montreal, and he's like, to get the same marks on the stones, I opened up a blacksmith so that I could have the tools made to duplicate the tools. And so this is what people are doing. So I was at that conference and I was presenting on neon, right? And so I'm presenting to people from all over the world about the preservation of neon. So it's just growing and growing in terms of, you know, my kind of network of people and the people that are welcoming of me, and then also then my understanding of all the other people that are doing this. And so the movement is big. I mean, the Route 66, the centennial, it's huge for neon.
Yes. Well, Route 66 in general for historic. And that's how I got to talking a lot with Mary Frances that introduced us with the Mid Century Modern magazine.
Right?
Uh, Route 66 is the low hanging fruit. You might say it's the gateway drug. It's got people talking about commercial architecture of this
Yes.
1940s, 50s period. And uh, yeah. So Route 66 is the low end of this. I just received a note with that sound you heard, the hunting horns there. Uh, Reese Martin from the Oklahoma Route 66 Association National Trust for Historic Preservation, Route 66 Corridor Director. He'll be our guest on the program on April 26th. He just sent me some photos. I don't know what this is, like 30-foot neon Chrysler Plymouth dealership sign in Bristow, Oklahoma, was just relit last night. First time in 70 years.
Fantastic.
Yeah, this is really really exciting.
Well,
Uh,
it would be great because, I've seen videos of when they relight signs in Pocatello, and
yeah,
there's these great videos because Universal Studios, they have a recreation of the Cars Radiator Springs, so that
yes,
car,
yes.
yeah, and people come there and then they have that recreation of that point in the movie where Radiator Springs, all their signs come on. And so people pack in there to be a part of that reenactment, and people just weep. I mean, they just cry when that neon comes on. And so I'm wondering if that's what happened with this, Chrysler Plymouth dealership when that came back on after 70 years. Did people just weep and go, "Oh my God"?
One of the tragedies, and I shared a link here. I was reading that article that was published in February about your initiative there in Denver,
Hmm.
and pardon my French, folks, but you can't put crap back in the donkey. And
Hmm.
so it is a tragedy what happened in the 60s when we had this scrap the signs movement.
Right.
But on the other hand, that's one of the things that adds such value to what Todd's work today and to the preservation of historic signs and creating new neon. That's what
Yeah.
really adds value to this because we have an awareness of what we've lost.
Yes. Yeah. No, and then it's one of, I oftentimes have people come down that's one of the things that kind of changed my relationship with the preservation community in Denver is that I would have different people come down, so I would have the Landmark Preservation Commission or Denver Planning or, the Bilko Momo. I would just have all these organizations come down to the shop, and then I would give them a tour and I'd give them a history of neon, and then I'd have people bend glass so that they could
Mm-hmm.
understand. I mean, this is the craft, this is what it takes, right? And it's much harder than it looks. Like if you watch a video of somebody bending glass, you go, "Oh, it doesn't look that hard." I just had people in yesterday, and they have this historic building with these signs on it. And of course, a sign company has come out and said, "Well, we can put LED on there." And so I've been eyeing this sign for probably 3 or 4 years, hoping that nobody destroys it or defiles it with LED, unexposed neon. And so I went to him and I said, "Hey, you should just come down to the shop." And so the owners of the building came down to the shop, and I was like, "Okay, let's bend some stuff." And they got into fires, and their hands are going everywhere, and the glass is going everywhere. And they're like, "This is way harder than we thought." And I was like, "It is. It's like it's a craft, it's an art, and it's way harder, and that's why it costs more." Because there's a human being that makes it. But when most people, when they come down, I say, just plan on 4 to 6 hours of being in the shop, and without fail, 6 hours comes and I go, "You guys got to go home, get out of here," because people are just there saying, "Can we do something else? What else can you tell us?" And so as you're talking about this, and talking about the signs that came down and what's happening with new signs, it's this long 4 hour story of how that happens. But it's one of the great things in terms of, when we're talking about it in terms of preservation of signs, obviously, but you need the craftspeople to do it. And these young people that are coming to it are unbelievable. I just can't say it enough, just how incredible they are. I belong to something called the Neon Makers Guild, and it's
Yes.
great because it's this online community of people, and it's usually people who make neon or have neon shops or who do plasma work, because it's not really interesting to most other people. When you're saying, "Hey, who's having trouble with green glass?" that doesn't interest a lot of people, but the people on there are like, "Hey," but the people on there, they're there's like kind of, this is kind of the history of neon as well. There's usually a missing generation, so there's a group of people that learn how to do it, then something comes along that threatens the industry, and that group of people then holds tight to their knowledge, and then a whole generation kind of gets skipped. And then the next generation comes and they say, hey, we're going to figure it out. And then some of the older people who are retiring say, okay, we'll tell you. And then that generation takes it on. And so it's kind of the same thing now. So there's, in the Neon Makers Guild, there's a lot of people that are over 60 years old. And then there's a lot of people that are under 40, and there's kind of this missing realm there between 40 and 60. And so these young people that are under 40, what they bring to this, it's just, I have no idea what you guys are doing. It's incredible, so they're pulling their own twos, so they're doing hot glass work. They're doing stuff where it's 3-dimensional instead of just 2-dimensional. They're doing stuff that interacts with your smartphone. So you go by the neon sign and the neon sign interacts with you. And so the stuff they're doing is just going to push neon beyond what we think of. We do think of Route 66, or we think of Vegas or Radiator Springs in the movie Cars. And that's generally what we think of as neon. But they're pushing it to this new realm. And I think it might even be a different terminology. They might call it plasma, because LED, if you go on and you Google neon signs, it's going to come up to be LED. It's going to be all LED signs. They're not actually neon. And so I think that they're going to kind of rebrand what neon is, and it's probably going to be called plasma or something like that, so that people know they're getting the real thing, not a fake thing.
When you start blending the technologies, and people, especially as we age out, we have a tendency to let technology, AI, and a lot of these things kind of scare us. But it's a tool, just like anything else, and finding creative ways to link the artistry of neon, which it's not ancient technology, but it's definitely outdated technology, so to speak. And you link that with something modern. Gosh, just the possibilities are as unlimited as the imagination.
Yeah, it's really dynamic. Yeah, the fun thing about it, is that if you look at pictures of neon shops from the 20s and 30s, a lot of the equipment they use is the same that we use today.
Yeah.
So we always think, if it was like somebody could time travel and they came from, 1923 neon shop and 24 shop in America, they would walk into our shop and they would recognize most of the stuff in there, and they would be able to just pick it up and start working again. So most of the stuff is still there. A lot of the user end of it is different. So you're right. So kind of the technology is coming in, not for the craft part of it, but for the delivery part of it, and that's the part, again, you're right, that we as, older adults, have the opportunity to embrace this, change in our passion and our craft and our livelihood. And when we embrace it, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm finding a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but there is uh, a segment of the under 40 crowd. And as early as you catch glimpses of the 16 to 40-year-olds who are embracing the modern world, but they're also interested in something more tangible than building websites and things of this nature. You see it in the Gilmore Museum in Michigan. They started a Model T driving school, and it
Oh,
was
that's awesome.
16 to 25-year-olds were
That's
interested.
awesome.
I had a fellow on the program a while back, Ryan Thiebold. He's, I believe, an electrical engineer by trade, passionate about Model A's and Model T's, and he's quit his job. All he does is build, repair, fix, and sell Model A's and Model T's. That's
That's
all he
amazing.
does. Wheelwrights. I found another young man about
Huh.
28 years old that's studying to make wood spoke wheels.
Wow.
Yeah.
No,
So,
because I've been talking, about crafts coming back, and in the England, the UK, they have a list of crafts that are dying, and neon is on that list. And so we're like, it's not dying. How did we make the list? And it's like hand sewn cricket balls is on the list, this kind of stuff, And I was like, when's the last time you needed a wheelwright? And
yeah.
so I take it back. I'm sorry, wheelwrights. I won't say that anymore.
Well, I mean, let's, unless you have a car with wood spoke wheels, which narrows the market down. but neon is something different. And no offense to wheelwrights, but
We're
the
not picking
market.
on wheelwrights here.
No, but the market for wood spoke wheels is very finite. But the market for new neon signage or restored neon is unlimited.
Yeah. No, I think the other thing that you're driving at here, Jim, again, this is a pun for you. I think the thing you're driving at here is that where the neon shop is now, we're like in a kind of light industrial area. And so we have a garage bay, two garage bays. But on one side of us, there's two garage bays that's this craft brewery. And so it's busy all the time. The parking lot is filled with these young people that are coming to buy, $3 to $5 beers. It's because they want something that's handmade, that's
Yeah.
local made. And on the other side of us, there's a craft distillery, and it's just nuts in there on the weekend. People coming in to buy craft, spirits. And so it is this movement where, they do appreciate the new technology, but they also are willing to pay for things that are handcrafted and locally crafted.
A distillery next door. I could see the advertisement now. Get in the spirit of neon.
Well, one of the things I wanted to do, but the people at the shop who own it, who are a little more liability sensitive than I am, I wanted to have lights and flights, and you could come and
Oh
get a
yes.
flight. You could get a flight of whiskeys or a flight of beer, and then come over and bend some neon. And they were like, "We are not having people drinking in here."
Oh
So.
my gosh. Yeah, that might be that would be that'd be kind of like getting a discount ticket on the Titanic after it hit an iceberg.
Yeah.
That'd be bad news. If anybody, our audience this morning knows of neon, old signs sitting in somebody's backyard, or especially in Colorado, or old neon signs, feel free to chime in now or a little bit later, and I'll get the information out. There's pockets of places that I'd like to recommend for travelers if you have an interest in neon. There's a place in Los Angeles, the Grand Central Market. It's downtown in the historic theater district, which is currently being renovated. It's being brought back to life. And the theater district down in LA, 7th and Broadway, the original western terminus of Route 66, has more theaters than Times Square in New York, and they're all beautiful 1910 to 1930 theaters. But Grand Central Market opened in 1917. It's a massive food court, and there's 100 years of neon on display inside. They've got entire neon walls of old signs, new signs, and then there's restored signage inside from different restaurants and food courts, and it's a pretty stunning sensory overload if you go to the Grand Central Market on Broadway.
Yeah.
Throw that one out there.
And Los Angeles also has the Museum of Neon Art. And so that's there as well. And so, yeah, Los Angeles, it's one of the first places that neon came. And so it's all debated. But kind of the apocryphal story is that the first neon sign in America arrived in Los Angeles at Earl Anthony's Packard dealership.
Earl, I did not know that. I know the name.
This is heavily disputed. So if there's people out there that are neon historians, just know I know that this is heavily disputed.
Well, there's another example, folks. My pa said, "Better to fill the head with useless knowledge than no knowledge at all." But that doesn't.
I can help with that, Jim.
Yes, we can. I'm sure we both can do that. But it's only useless knowledge unless you get called on to Jeopardy. But Earl Anthony, I'm not surprised he would be an early one to embrace neon. For those who aren't familiar, Earl Anthony was the car dealer for the Stars. He had an extraordinary reputation for catering to the very rich and famous in Los Angeles at that time in the 20s. So I am not surprised that he would be one of the early proponents of neon.
Yeah. I think the other thing that wouldn't surprise you is that story is the story that's kind of told because he was a great self-promoter.
Yes.
So that probably doesn't surprise you either. So that's how he came to have this claim to fame, is that he really promoted, I have the first sign, this is the first sign. And so he was great at that. And that's probably how he got to be car dealer to the stars as well.
It's fascinating, and now that there's an interest and an awareness of neon in a lot of communities, uh, where some of these signs turn up. We've got a little bit of an initiative. The Route 66 Association of Kingman, Arizona, started collecting vintage neon signs or working to have signs recreated or
Hmm.
produced for buildings, and started collecting historic neon signs. And before Scott Dutton passed away, the founder of the association, he found the 1950s branding iron motel sign. The motel is still here in Kingman. It's now apartments, but he found the sign in a wrecking yard in Phoenix, Arizona,
Hmm.
180 miles away.
Yeah. No, it is one of the things that's kind of difficult right now. There was a person here in Denver that was kind of rescuing signs that were headed to the scrapyard, and it's difficult. They're big. Like if you see them up on the pole, you go, "Oh, that's a beautiful sign. I wouldn't mind that." We recently saved, because it was getting cut down, and I don't like this. I like to have them lit in place. But they were cutting down this motel sign, and then so instead of it going to the scrapyard, I was like, "Is there any way we can come and get it?" And they were like, "Yeah, you guys can come and get it." And so somebody that I knew said, "Oh, I'll come over with my Subaru and we could put one in the back of my Subaru, one of these." Yeah. And it was this, it was 5 individual letters on a pole. So it said Motel. And they said, I'll just come over with my Subaru. And I was like, I don't know what you're going to do with your Subaru. Those things are huge, and we could hardly lift them. We had to have the crane lift it to put it in the back of the truck. And then we just kind of tumbled it out and, Egyptian technology, we rolled it across to where we kept it. These things are huge. And so this guy that was saving these, had his backyard full of them. And then he was like, I've got to sell my house. What am I going to do with them? And we just could not find a place for them. And so they kind of go into the wind. People who are collectors say, I'll come down with my trailer and we'll grab it. And so that's how they kind of get dispersed out into the wild. And then they just show up again like this, right?
And they get repurposed, and not just
Yep.
today, but signs get repurposed over the years.
Yep.
We have the Lockwood's Chicken in the Rough sign that recently turned up here. Uh, and it had been repurposed as a Catholic mission sign and a few other things. And
Yep.
you start peeling the paint, and surprise.
Yeah. No, I just restored a sign, and it's S&J's Auto Garage and Complete Service, right? And so the sign is just like, even to look at it, you go, that's just a really kind of interesting design style. And then as I was, stripping it down, that old white paint, it had lead in it, so it kind of leaves a ghost on the galvanized metal. And so I started stripping it, and I could see that it was like 4 signs that had been put together. And underneath, you could see at one point it had come from Norm's, and I think Norm's was like a tire retreading shop in Denver. And so they took the Norms can and then they just attached it to this auto service can. And then they had another one that was an address, and they changed the address and attached that to it. And so you could see 4 different signs in this one sign. And as I peeled back the paint, you could see the different layers. This is when the sign was turquoise and white. This is when it was gold and red. And you could just see the different layers of what it had been. And so then the dilemma became, what do I restore it back to? Do I take it back to the 4 individual signs? Do I take it back to the one where it was all Frankenstein together? So I did kind of put it back like the Frankenstein together, because that was the one that we had the most reference material for.
There's a group of people I know from the Netherlands and some other places. They call them neon sign geeks, and they plan their entire vacations, their entire holidays around trips where they can photograph old neon.
Yeah. There's a woman, and I can't remember where she actually lives. Deborah Jane Seltzer. Do you know her?
No, I do not.
Roadside Architecture.
The name's familiar, but I do not know her.
Yeah, and so I'm not, I'm always nervous about putting stuff on, while we're talking, and so I'll send you a link later,
Yeah.
but she's the same way, and she's just incredible. So she plans her vacations, and she just like times it, and she's like, okay, so I'm going to go on this route, and these are the signs I'm going to take pictures of, and she just has it down to, like the hour. These are the hours where I'm going to be and where I'm going to be, and then she spends the rest of the year just cataloging it. And so if you go on her website, like you could put in, oh, I'm interested in motel signs, and then it'll pull up motel signs. If you go, I'm interested in bowling signs, I'm interested in signs in Arizona, you can do that way. You could just search it however. And she just goes in and then she writes a little history of that style of signs. And if she meets the owner, she'll write a history. It's unbelievable. It's just it's the place to go for me to kind of get information on science, because she's remarkable. And then the other thing that I'll throw out, there's a guy he's in Minnesota now. He was in Alaska, but he's moved to Minnesota. I think he's outside the Twin Cities. And his name is Robert House, and he calls himself the neon archaeologist. And unbelievable. Like if you want any information on neon, like if you go, what year did that color come into use? He'll say, well, here's the catalog that came in August of 1951. That was when it was first introduced by Sylvania. And he can just, so those people from the Netherlands, there are people here waiting for them.
Praise the Lord for people who are just absolutely anal on
Yeah.
certain subjects. They just become obsessive because they become such a repository for preservation of the history and the culture of these kind of
Yes.
things. So important. One of my favorite signs, that's good, Jessica. Jessica said it, so he moved somewhere a bit warmer from Alaska to Minnesota. Actually, trust me, I lived in Minnesota and Northwest Wisconsin for a while. That's
Yeah.
coldest. What? That's
He's up there in International Falls where it's warm.
Oh God, I was up in that country, and honest to God, 40 below zero. I've seen it. One of my favorite neon
just before we
signs.
leave this, I went to school for 1 year in Alaska, and so I went to college there. And so I went there and I flew out there, and it was a warm fall, and so when I got there, I was like, well, everybody goes on. And I was like, and then I came home for Christmas, and it had never gotten really cold. And I came back for Christmas to Denver, and people were like, oh, it must be freezing up there. And I was like, yeah, it's just not that bad. And they were like, oh, okay. And then the plane, when I flew back in January, the plane landed. They didn't have skyways, and so you just got out onto the tarmac, right? And so they opened the door to the cabin, and the pilot said, welcome to Fairbanks International Airport. Outside temperature minus 52 degrees. And I was like, what did you say? And it was like the moisture in your nostrils froze. Everything just froze. And I was like, it's cold now.
Oh, I don't miss that stuff. One of my favorite signs, and I'll do a blog post when I publish this today. I also want to get the information from you on your Save the Sign initiative. And that way I can share that with people when I post this today. But I'll get a blog post up this week about the neon signs, Todd's program there, what Tulsa's doing. And I'll share some pictures of some of my favorite signs.
Love it.
One of my favorites is a very small sign. And if you're a Route 66 enthusiast, you might be aware of this. It's in the LA metro area. I don't remember the community off the top of my head, out towards San Bernardino. And it's just a small neon arrow. And it says Ned's Oil and Stuff. And that's just absolutely one of my favorites. Ned's Oil and Stuff. You gotta love that.
You could, one of the things in my preservation studies, there was one of my classes was the psychology of preservation, and they talked about why do we love old stuff. And one of the things, this guy has done all this work, his name is Jeremy Wells. And so he's done all this work to study why people love old buildings, why they love old signs. And one of the things that he says is that when we see something that's old, we have two things that happen to us. Number one is that we have this unconscious awareness of unseen effort. And so the amount of human effort it took to make it, to keep it, and to keep it going over all these decades or even centuries, we have an unconscious recognition of that, and we relate to it. And the second thing that happens is there's something called spontaneous fantasy. And so you see that sign that says Ned's Oil and Stuff, and then you make up all these stories about it, like who Ned was and why he chose to put stuff on his sign. And they might not be real. The stuff that you make up in your head, those stories, you may not, but you have this incredible experience with it. As you say, well, Ned went in and he said, I wanted to say oil and gasoline and lube. And they said, that's going to be this much. And he said, well, how about if we just put in stuff? Right? You have this story that you make up. And it's
Yeah.
why we love these old things, is because people do have that experience and they've studied it and they've documented that we do have that. And as soon as you said Ned's oil and stuff, I had a lot of spontaneous fantasies.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty. I think that's encapsulated in that song by the Road Crew, Under the Neon.
Yeah,
The romanticism that goes with this, the memories that's unleashed, even if you don't have a direct, uh, if even if you don't have a direct connection with a particular sign,
yes.
you have a flashback to something. There's a link to something. You're in Memphis and you see a barbecue neon sign, and you instantly remember a meal of a great barbecue you had in Kansas City or somewhere else. It unleashes something.
There is great barbecue in Kansas City and there are great neon.
This is an interesting question that just popped up here in my feed. Uh, was radium ever used in neon signage in the
Yeah,
1950s? That's
I
interesting.
yeah, I don't believe it was. Like on the sign backing, is that what they're asking?
Probably, my guess would be the backing of the sign. Yes.
Yeah, and so I can imagine that it was used in like the neon clocks,
Well,
so
yes, it was definitely used in
yeah.
fact, this is going on another tangent, but there's a documentary, I believe it was a PBS, about the women who died.
Yeah, yeah,
But radium, Chrysler was a very big proponent of using hand painted radium for
yeah.
their instrument clusters in Chrysler, DeSoto, Plymouth products, and then, of course, alarm clocks, things of that nature. So I imagine that's why this was asked, if there was
Yeah.
any use of radium in the backing for neon signage.
Well, it's a good question as well because in the early, and so this is going to be just kind of a little tangent, but in the early years of neon, when they were trying to get different colors, what they did originally was, they had clear glass and then they used neon and then mostly argon with a mercury vapor. And so those are what's primarily used today. But the noble gases, they did mix. So in the early years to make different colors, they would mix in helium or krypton and xenon. And so they were kind of like almost like mixing paint. They would mix in the different noble gases to make different colors. But
Mhm.
then when they wanted more colors, what they did first was they started to make different colored tubes. And so almost like stained glass, they would pull tubes that had the color in the glass itself. So like ruby red glass would, you would have that red, it would look blood red when you saw it, or cobalt blue. And so you would have cobalt in the glass. And so they made a uranium glass, which made it like a canary green or this kind of yellowish. And so they did use uranium in neon in the early times, but then after the war, they didn't have uranium in the glass anymore because they were using uranium for other stuff. Um, and then another kind of fun thing is if you look at the noble gases, and this is again a radium thing, that the noble gases are incredible. I just love that part of it. And so the noble gases on that far side of your periodic chart, you have helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, radon, and then ogancium is a new kind of synthesized one. But the chemists that discovered it, they named those things, and they're really clever. So helium is named helium because the spectral lines of helium gas when excited are the same as the sun. So it's named helium after Helios, the Greek god. And then neon means the new one because it's the new gas. Argon means the lazy one because argon is a very light lavender. Krypton is named after Superman's planet, right? Krypton means the hidden one, and because there's
Hmm.
very little of it, and so it means the hidden one. And then xenon is the one that was really hard to detect, and it's called xenon because it's the foreigner or the stranger. They were like, who's in there? But then radon, which is the radioactive one, is not very fun. That's not very fun to work with, but it's also not very fun in terms of its naming because it's the radioactive decay of radium. And so that's
Mhm.
how that gas comes to be. So the radium question was a great question. It ties in a lot of ways. But
Right, right. Fascinating. Here's another question for you. What was the 30s were really kind of 30s and 40s were the big period for a lot of the massive neon. Do you know what
Yes.
the largest neon sign? Do you have any idea how big, what the largest neon sign in America
Oh,
was?
so there was. I'm going to see if I can pull it up real quick. And so they made this Richfield oil sign, and it was on a hill, and I believe it was in Tennessee. And the letters, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'm gonna say because it was put on like telephone poles, and that's what the cross beams. And so I have a picture, and there's 10 guys that are stacked up working on it. So
Oh,
it's 10 guys high. So the letters I think were 60 feet high on the
God.
Richfield. But of course, the Vegas signs are insane in terms of like the footage. You know, when you
Yeah.
say how many feet of glass are in that sign. But let me see if I can pull up that Richfield sign real quick. But an interesting thing when we were talking about Charles Lindbergh and aviation, and then you mentioned Los Angeles, and one of the things that happened in the early days in the 30s when they were trying to do this aviation and stuff. I mean, Richfield Oil designed gas stations to be a certain distance apart so that you could find the next gas station, but they also then designed little towns that would be that distance apart, and they would put in the center of these towns that they created, they would put a gigantic pylon that would say Richfield Oil, and those were the beacons that they used. But then in the
Hmm.
cities like in Los Angeles had um, a height limit on buildings because of the earthquakes. And I'm not finding the slide right now, but there was a building in Los Angeles back in the 30s that I think it was 8 stories high, and then the sign that was on top of it said Richfield, and I think it was 6 stories high. And so the sign on top of the building was almost equal to the building. Um,
It's all, it's just hard. I can picture that, but I mean, there's,
I'll send some pictures and links.
yeah,
And I'm
please
sorry
do
that I
it.
don't know the Richfield sign, but I
Oh,
think it
no.
was claimed to be the largest sign at the time, and the letters were 60 feet. And I think the stroke on the letter, and I'm just again filling my head with useless knowledge, but I think the stroke on the letter, so like the rise on the R, I think they were 11 feet wide. So I think they were 11 feet wide by 60 feet high, but the 11 feet was the stroke. So you can imagine like the H in Richfield, it was probably 35 feet wide. And so this was on a hillside, I think in Tennessee, and there was just these gigantic letters.
Can
So
you, I can, it's just hard to fathom not only seeing a sign like that along the road, but I know very little about the construction of neon, but the artistry of that and the work. Uh, Thank you, Jessica. Jessica May says her husband Mike runs a Facebook page about the Richfield oil signs.
oh, nice. Well, they
Thank you,
will know.
Jessica.
Yeah, they'll know about I think there's one of the Richfield towns that are still left in California, and uh, and then they'll know about these Richfield oil towers that were
Uh,
in a lot of cities. So yeah, if that's great. I'm gonna go and check. When you put all the links in, because that would be great to see this Jessica's husband's site.
yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really I appreciate you on many levels. You've really sparked my imagination. The Facebook group is called Richfield Beacons.
Nice.
Uh, this conversation today has really got me my head spinning on different projects. I always have to rein in my imagination, but I think what we need to do now is discuss having a conference of guild people, craftspeople, neon woodworkers, and others. Possibly someplace like Needles, California, down at the old El Garces Hotel on the Colorado River, because we could do that as a winter conference, because Needles, you don't want to go there in the summer, but in the winter it's pretty nice.
My wife broke down in needles one year when she was in college. They took a road trip out to Los Angeles, and their car broke down in needles, and that's a whole other story about what happened there.
That's the running joke about Kingman, is that people stopped here to wait for the wind to quit blowing, and everybody else just broke down here.
And never could get out. Parts never arrived.
After about 6 months, you realize it's not such a bad place. God bless. Todd, thank you. This has been absolutely a wonderful conversation. Got a couple things, though, I got to do. I don't want to tie everybody up. We're going to wrap this up. I'll get the information from Todd on the Save the Sign initiative there. I've got information on some of the neon sign initiatives in Tulsa. Oh, thank you, Margaret. She said the R.E. Olds Transportation Museum has salvaged the neon sign from the Oldsmobile Ballpark in East Lansing.
Oh, no kidding.
Very good. I'll put all this together as quick as I can, the information for everyone. And I'll have this podcast published this afternoon if you'd like to publish it and share it around. I think it'd be great. I also have information about the new Bristow, Oklahoma sign, the lighting of the Hotel Beale sign, and some other groups. I'll include information about Mike May's Richfield's Beacons page.
Nice.
And I'll put this together sometime this week. Before we wrap this up, a couple things that are semi-related. Speaking of artistry, next week we're going to visit with David Schwartz, and he is an extraordinary photographer. And he has documented a lot of neon, but a lot of roadside America in general. Inspired countless road trips with his art exhibits, photography for magazines and others. And his Route 66 images, including a couple neon signs, have been selected for the official U.S. Postal Service Route 66 Centennial Stamp Collection.
Nice.
So we'll be talking to him. And then, tied in with today's program, I'm one of these people who are a firm believer the muffler is connected to the wheel bearing. It's just in a roundabout way. On the 26th of April, we'll be talking to Reese Martin. I mentioned earlier, he's the president of the Oklahoma Association, Route 66 Association, and the director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation Route 66 program. He's like Todd. He has an infectious enthusiasm for what he does. And we'll get some more information about the Tulsa neon work from him, as well as on the Bristow sign. We've got some big changes, unfortunately and fortunately, coming to Coffee with Jim in May. Podbean has informed me that in May, they're no longer going to have live stream programming options. So this old dog's having to learn a few new tricks to keep this going. And I think I've narrowed it down a tad bit, and I'll be sharing details on the Jim Hinckley's America website real soon. Need to give a shout out to a couple folks here who make a lot of this stuff possible, like Vicky Ashcraft at the Enchanted Trails Trading Post and RV Park in New Mexico, and one of the founding members of the New Mexico Route 66 Alliance. And she was a real pioneer. She was heavily involved in the Route 66 Association of New Mexico until that kind of blew up. Some folks decided to start a competing organization, and that's a long story, but she has dedicated years to working with the Route 66 community. David Brenner out at the Roadrunner Lodge in Tucumcari, New Mexico. Definitely no mere motel. This is as close to a 1960s, early 60s immersion experience as you're going to get. And then, of course, we'll give a shout out to Austin at Two-Lane America. His tours are first rate. Same with Sam Murray down at Gilligan's Route 66 Tours, who does a great self-drive option or caravan type tours of Route 66. And he also has a great tour through the heartland from Minneapolis to New Orleans along the Mississippi River. And Dina Nelson, State Farm Insurance here in Kingman, and good friends, Stephen and Chantel, UK-based Route Trip USA, specializing in road trips and rail trips in the United States and Canada. All great folks who have really, really been beneficial to, help us do what we do best, telling people where to go and sharing America's story. But there's been a lot of fun. Todd, I am indebted, and thank you so very much for getting up early, probably earlier than you intended,
As it turns out.
since we were talking to each other about 6 o'clock this morning. But thank you, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. Send me any photos you have, information about your Save the Sign project, how people can help, and kick this idea around about let's I think a conference on Route 66, because it's such low hanging fruit and has such attention. If we were to put together, find a conference about neon sign restoration, preservation, and other historic preservation initiatives and projects, and how communities that invest in historic preservation generally get a bigger return on investment than new construction.
Yeah.
I think that might be something to discuss.
Yeah, there's a group called Neon Speaks out of San Francisco, and they have a yearly conference. That's an international conference of people that are, interested in preserving neon. And it's not just neon sign makers, it's photographers, it's typographers, and so they do that as well. And I know that it's a lot to put on one a year. And so if there was a second one that was led by Coffee with Jim Hinckley, I think that would be cool, because people are they're hungry for this.
Well, we could take it, we could use neon to shine a light on this, but we could take it a step further. People who are involved with creating historical awareness and what this means for economic development in communities.
Yes.
And if we put the emphasis on economic development, not being crass, because this is artistry, but if we put the emphasis on, Jessica, if we didn't do it in Jim and Shelley's backyard, you're right. Maybe we could do something nearby and include this as a kind of a field trip to Jim and Shelley's backyard. Like a thought. Jim Ross and Shelley Graham, I had not thought of this. I have not attended. They live in a small town of Arcadia, Oklahoma, outside of Oklahoma City. And they do every year. Jim has collected and restored a bunch of small neon signs, and they invite people out to their own little neon fest every year.
I've seen pictures of it. I've never attended or been invited, but I have seen pictures.
So if we got a conference in that area, and Jessica, thank you, Jessica, very much for volunteering to help put that together. She didn't say she was going to do that. I just volunteered her. That's the way things happen. This has been so much fun this morning. I hope everybody's enjoyed this as much as I have. God, this went fast.
This did go fast.
We're going to have to do this again. Not quite so early for you next time, but we'll got to do this again, Todd.
I'm thinking I'm having coffee with Jim in the next couple of weeks as well, because I got to hear from these other folks. Yeah,
next week, like say, we'll do David Schwartz and then Reese Martin. Hopefully by then, by starting in May, I hope to have all the details up. I'm going to take this kick in the pants instead of crying over. I finally figured out how to make this work, this podcast. Instead of crying over the fact that it's coming to an end, this chapter, I'm going to see it as an opportunity to take the network a step further. Awesome. And we're going to try to tie it all together. Our YouTube channel, podcast. We're going to see if we can put this thing together. And if that fails, I've got a career backup. I'm going to become an Amish farmer and just say to hell with all of it, all the technology. But
I hear they're looking for wheelwrights.
Oh, great. I was thinking blacksmith. I'll leave you with this. Folks, if you're looking for a career change, and it's on a serious note, you're never too old to start embracing changing and doing a direction. I had a very good friend of mine from Minnesota, kind of in a dead-end job. He was probably in his early 40s at the time, uh, he decided to study blacksmithing. And he became very proficient at it. And by the time he was 50-ish, he actually gave up everything, became a blacksmith in a Mennonite community of Yoder, Kansas. So there you go.
Okay, I know we're trying to wrap up, but there's always another story. So
Yes, sir.
when I was in school, and that I had all these young people that were in my cohort, and they were just lovely, So it wasn't like this, humoring the old guy or anything like that. They've become friends of mine, and so I see them, I go to dinner, I have lunch with them. They're just really lovely people, and they embrace me without prejudice. And at one point, we're in class, and I was given a presentation, and when I finished, the professor, who was older than me, said, I'm doing all this work in this class because I'm training the next generation. I'm training the next generation of preservationists. And then she turned to me and she pointed at me and she said, not you, them. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm the youngest person in this room. And then my cohort, who are so delightful, said, yeah, I mean, he's a juvenile. It's incredible. He's just like, he's an adolescent boy. He has not grown up, so it is, Jim, the world is our oyster now.
Yeah. I'm working on two things. I'm working to become a writer when I grow up. Well, I'm working to become a writer and I'm working on growing up. That's my
in
goal.
that order.
In that order. My friends, thank you. And we will send everyone off this morning with a little music from my good friends, Joe and Woody and the boys at Road Crew 66. I'll have this published this afternoon, and please feel free to share it around. I have an embedded player on several websites, including Mary Frances Mid-Century Modern Magazine, Jim Hinckley's America the Bee, the Kingman Tours website, and okay. Last questions. Official Coffee with Jim mug is on the Kingman Tours website from Kingman Main Street. They also have a full Route 66 Centennial gift shop there. So it's real easy to find. Kingman.tours, www.kingman.tours. Until we meet again, my friends, I will bid you adios. Todd, we're going to be talking again soon.
Please.
Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.
Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a 2-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.